return to our top story now. There's escalating tensions between the US and Iran. Well, as we mentioned, the US has increased its military presence right across the Middle East. At the center is the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, carrying fighter jets, including F-18s, F-35s, and electronic warfare aircraft. It's supported by several guided missile destroyers operating in the Gulf of Oman and in nearby waters. Flight tracking data also shows a surge in US military air activity, including refueling tankers, heavy cargo aircraft and surveillance planes moving between the United States, Europe and the Middle East. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Harlan Ullman. He's a former U.S. naval officer and the chairman of the Killowen Group. That's a strategic advisory. Good to have you with us. So first of all, how long, I think, is the question? How long before all the military pieces, at least, are in place for the U.S. to launch an attack on Iran?
I'll answer that in a second. But the big story, obviously, was tariffs. And I just note that Donald Trump had a way of doing this originally, get Congress to approve the law. My guess is that Congress will have a chance to do that. Whether or not the Democrats will filibuster is the issue, but there's a way out of it for Trump if he's smart enough to take it. Your question. It was just reported by the BBC that USS Gerald Ford is passing through the Straits of Gibraltar. It's about 3,500 to 4,000 miles from Gibraltar to the Gulf. The ships will have to transit through the Suez Canal, so I would guess it would take somewhere between 7 to 10 days for the carrier strike group headed by Ford to get to the Gulf. Trump has already issued a warning of 15 days, so my guess is that within 10 days or so, there'll be enough carriers, needing two in the Gulf, that if Trump wants to initiate action against Iran, he can do so. One hope is that is not the case, very simply because if you attack, what is the objective of the attack? How long will it take? And what happens next? None of those questions have been addressed, and none of them have been answered yet.
How long of a campaign could the U.S. sustain once all of the military pieces are in place, given your expertise and understanding of how naval operations unfold?
Those two carriers have been at sea for a very long time, and they need huge amounts of maintenance. The public is not really aware of that. It depends upon the intensity. If those ships can probably fly 125 missions a day, but there's pilot fatigue. During the Vietnam War, basically ships were on Yankee Station, that's the northern part of South Vietnam, for no more than 2 weeks. So my guess is that from the sea-based part of the exercise, a couple of weeks at most. We can sustain it from the shore bases that we have in the Gulf, in Bahrain and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But we're going to be very, very limited, because even though it seems like a huge amount of power, you require weapons, resupply, fuel, all those kinds of things. This is not Desert Storm, where you have 150,000
So, Harlan,
troops.
is the infrastructure in place this time for that kind of logistical and refueling support?
No, not for the long haul. We're talking about a campaign that goes more than 30 or 40 days. No, absolutely not. We're prepared to fight a short war, but I doubt that we'll be able to sustain it for the long term unless we deploy far more forces to the Gulf. So this would be seen, in my judgment, as an interim force. And it has a sustaining power, depending upon the intensity of the operations, of a couple of weeks at sea, and possibly a little bit longer from the shore.
If it's a couple of weeks, Harlan, is it feasible from a military perspective to start something that you can't sustain for more than a couple of weeks, on the idea that within those couple of weeks we'll see how it goes and we'll have time to amass the sort of logistical support for a longer operation? Or is that not how these things work?
You broke the code. We don't have a force big enough there to sustain. We don't know what the objectives are. One hopes that this is a force that's meant to exert pressure, political pressure, and that there will be an agreement. That's the way out of this mess. And the force right now is one whose presence is putting pressure on Iran to negotiate. But if it comes to using force, a midnight hammer, which is a one-strike only attack that we made, we're not going to be able to sustain a long fight out there unless we really put far more forces. And right now, we don't know what the purpose of those forces are. If they go to combat, they go to war, what the objectives are, and what happens next. So this has not necessarily been well thought out, or at least the public has not been advised of what the intentions are and what the long-term plans are. So you make a very, very good point. We could win a short war, but fighting a long war is going to be exceedingly difficult.
How much does the US know on the other side? Because a lot of the focus, the talk in the media, obviously, is about the US military buildup. But the reports are that the Iranians have also been doing some upgrading of their military, particularly their defensive systems. Do we know the details of what they've received from Russia and China? There's talk of them receiving the YLC-8B. Those are stealth detecting radars, we're told, air defense systems like the HQ-9Bs that we're told are very advanced Chinese systems. Does the US really have an accurate picture on what they might be flying into?
Oh, I'm not worried about that. If we're flying a few strikes, that's nothing that would particularly worry me. We will probably take some losses. The problem is that Iran has upwards of 5,000 or 6,000 missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. And the time of transit across the Gulf is not as long as it takes to hit Israel. So Iran could launch a massive barrage of weapon systems against Saudi Arabia, against whatever forces we may have inside the Gulf. Those would be very, very difficult to defend against. So there will be casualties. It's not a question of the Americans' ability to strike Iran. It's a question of what damage Iran can do with its weapons to strike the Gulf states and shipping that's within the Gulf and to shut the Strait of Hormuz, which would cause some kind of a crisis. This is extremely serious. I hope that we've thought things out. I'm less worried about the Pentagon. I'm much more worried about the White House because, as I said, there's no clear-cut sign of what the strategy is, what the intentions are, and what comes next. And so one hopes that diplomacy is the answer, but as we know, hope is not a strategy.
All right, thanks so much. Harlan Ullman there, former US naval officer.
Don't miss out. Get a full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.